He slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. The sound still echoes in my head. That was the moment I realized something inside me had snapped. I stood there barefoot on the kitchen tiles, still in the t-shirt I'd slept in, staring at the empty driveway. The car seats were gone. My 2 babies, Eli and Grace, were gone. And the man I'd trusted with everything I had just looked me dead in the eyes before walking out and said, "Don't worry, Sarah. The court will know you're not well enough to care for them. Not well enough." He said it like it was a fact, like something he'd rehearsed. My knees went weak. I remember the smell of burnt coffee on the counter, the hiss of the kettle still boiling behind me. My hands shaking so badly, I spilled it trying to turn it off. There's this strange moment after betrayal when your mind refuses to believe what your eyes have seen. I thought he'd come back. I thought it was just another one of his cruel threats, another manipulation to keep me quiet. But then my phone buzzed. One text from his lawyer. "Mr. Walker has filed for emergency custody on grounds of maternal instability." Maternal instability. That's what they called it. I laughed, this sharp, ugly laugh that didn't sound like me. I wasn't unstable. I was exhausted. There's a difference. But that difference doesn't matter when your husband is charming, calm, and convincing, and you're the one crying in the courtroom. Ryan wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't want to see it. When we first met, I thought he was the safest person I'd ever known. He worked in finance, wore the same crisp shirts every day, spoke softly, and never raised his voice. After years of chaos with my stepfamily, drunken fights, broken promises, nights of hiding in my room, Ryan felt like peace. He told me I could finally rest. And I did. I rested in his version of love. We married young. I gave up my job to raise our kids because that's what he wanted. "You're better with them than any nanny," he'd say. I cooked, cleaned, did preschool drop-offs, and handled every late-night fever alone. I didn't notice how small my world had become. My friends stopped calling. My bank account was in his name. He'd take my phone to fix it and come back with half my contacts missing. He said it was for my own good. He said I got anxious too easily. And I believed him. The first time he called me crazy was after I found lipstick on his shirt. It wasn't mine. He smiled, wiped it off, and said, "You really should see someone, Sarah. You make up stories in your head." That night, I sat in the bathroom with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at my reflection under the harsh white light. My face looked swollen, red from crying. He came in, crouched down, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I'm just trying to help you, baby. You need rest." I remember thinking, maybe I do. That's how it started. Slowly. Subtly. Like water eroding rock. When he filed for custody, his evidence was simple. Screenshots of texts where I sounded irrational. A note from my therapist saying I was struggling with anxiety. And a few statements from his family, his mother mostly, saying I'd been acting paranoid. What he didn't show was what caused it. He didn't show how he'd disappear for days, how I found hotel receipts, how he'd tell me our marriage wasn't working because I was too emotional. He didn't show the time I begged him to let me see my kids after he locked me out for 2 days. But in court, the calm one always wins. When the judge ruled in his favor, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, feeling everything drain out of me. People talk about heartbreak like it's one big, cinematic moment. But mine felt like a quiet suffocation. Like someone had placed a pillow over my life and was holding it there. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the 2 empty toys by the dresser, Grace's stuffed bear and Eli's broken truck. My lawyer said we'd appeal, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Ryan had already painted me as unstable, and the court bought it. It wasn't just a custody battle. It was a character assassination. That's when something in me shifted. Not rage. Not even grief. Just clarity. I realized that the version of me he'd built, this fragile, dependent woman, was the same one who let him take everything. So I decided to become someone else. Someone he wouldn't recognize. Someone he couldn't destroy. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of my quiet war. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not my sister, not my therapist, not even the one friend I had left, who kept checking in with messages like, "You'll get them back, Sarah. Just stay strong." I didn't need sympathy. I needed proof. Proof that Ryan wasn't the stable, responsible father he pretended to be. That night, I opened a new email account, one he couldn't trace, and started going through every old message, every receipt, every note he'd left around the house. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that comes when you finally stop surviving and start fighting. I knew where he kept his backups. He had this habit of emailing documents to himself: insurance forms, work files, invoices. I found one thread labeled private. Inside were screenshots of text messages between him and someone named Amanda. She wasn't just a fling. She was his coworker. The woman I'd met at his company's holiday party, the one who hugged me and said, "Ryan talks about you all the time." I remember staring at those screenshots, my heart beating so loudly it felt like a drum in my ears. Their conversations were disgusting. Jokes about me mocking my moods, her telling him he should just get full custody already. He replied, "Almost done. She's fragile. Everyone already knows that." Fragile. That word kept echoing in my head like a curse. I printed every message. I took photos of everything: his calls, his transactions, his deleted messages that I recovered through his synced laptop. I didn't even feel guilty. This wasn't spying. This was survival. When I met with my lawyer 2 days later, she looked at the pile of evidence and exhaled slowly. "Sarah, this could change things." But it wasn't enough. The court needed more than just infidelity. They needed proof that he'd manipulated the system, that he'd lied. So, I decided to dig deeper. Ryan used to be careless when he drank. I knew his pattern: Friday nights at the Oak Room, same table, same whiskey. I sat in my car across the street for hours that first week, waiting. It felt pathetic at first, like I was confirming every insult he'd ever thrown at me. But then I saw him. He wasn't alone. He was with Amanda. They were laughing, hands touching across the table like no one could see them. And when she left, he called his mother. I could only catch fragments of the conversation, but the words "she won't last long," and "the lawyer says we've got this in the bag," cut through the night air like knives. I recorded everything. At home, the silence was unbearable. I'd look at the empty beds and smell their shampoo on the pillows. Some nights I'd hear phantom footsteps in the hallway, Grace's giggle, Eli's cry. My body would react before my brain caught up. That's the kind of grief you can't explain to anyone. But in that loneliness, I found something strange: focus. I started journaling, tracking every date, every conversation, every time Ryan slipped up. It wasn't obsession, it was evidence. It was structure. And for the first time in years, I was the one in control. 3 weeks later, he called me out of the blue. His voice was smooth, casual. "Hey, just checking if you're, doing better. Grace had a cough last night, but she's fine." I kept my tone neutral. "Glad to hear it. You should really get help, Sarah," he said softly, as if he cared. "The court's going to order a psych eval soon. It might help your case if you show you're cooperating." It was calculated. He wanted me emotional, angry, hysterical, unstable. But I'd learned. "I already am," I lied. "Weekly sessions." There was a pause. "Good," he said. "That's good." What he didn't know was that I'd already switched therapists. My new one was documenting everything: his manipulation, the emotional abuse, the gaslighting. Every word was in my record now. And those records were admissible in court. By the time the second custody hearing came around, I wasn't the same woman who'd stood trembling in that courtroom. My hair was pulled back neatly. I wore no jewelry, no distractions. Just a calm smile and a folder full of truth. Ryan looked confident, like a man who'd already won. He didn't even glance at me. His lawyer started with the same narrative. "My client is concerned about Ms. Walker's erratic behavior, her emotional instability." Then my lawyer stood up and began to speak. Calm. Precise. She handed over a binder: messages, photos, recordings. "Your Honor," she said, "we have reason to believe Mr. Walker's allegations were a deliberate fabrication, coordinated with a romantic partner, for the purpose of manipulating custody proceedings." The judge's face shifted. Ryan's didn't yet, but I saw it in his eyes. The first flicker of panic. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. That night, I sat in the car outside the courthouse, hands gripping the steering wheel. The city lights blurred through my tears. It wasn't victory yet, but it was movement. It was the first step toward reclaiming what he stole. I whispered to myself, "He took my kids, but he doesn't get to take me." The war was far from over. But now I had a weapon: truth. The hearing didn't end that day. The judge postponed the final ruling pending further review of submitted evidence. It wasn't a win, but it was enough to make Ryan sweat. He walked past me in the hallway afterward, pretending to fix his tie. "Nice try," he whispered. "You think this changes anything? You're still unstable, Sarah. You'll always be unstable." I looked straight at him. Maybe. But now you're scared of me. He froze. Just for a second. That's how I knew I'd hit the mark. The next few weeks were quiet, too quiet. Ryan stopped calling. His lawyer requested more time to prepare, and Amanda deleted her social media accounts. That told me everything. They were hiding something. So I kept digging. I learned that the company Ryan worked for had a strict policy against relationships between managers and subordinates. Amanda was his direct report. If HR found out, it could cost him his job and his credibility in court. I knew what I had to do. One evening, I sat down at my laptop, opened a new email, and typed to hr@stanfieldfinancial.com. Subject: concern about manager-subordinate relationship. Dear HR Department, I'm writing anonymously regarding a potential policy violation involving a senior analyst, Ryan Walker, and a junior associate, Amanda Pierce. Their relationship appears to be ongoing and has raised ethical concerns within the team. Best, a concerned employee. I hesitated before hitting send. My finger hovered over the mouse. Then I remembered his smirk outside the courtroom. How certain he looked that he'd already won. I clicked send. 2 days later, I got a call from my lawyer. Sarah, something's happening. His company's HR department just issued a request for employment verification for Ryan. I think they're investigating him. I didn't reply. I just smiled, a small, tired smile. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. Ryan had built a narrative of control. Every lie, every manipulation, every time he called me crazy, he'd built it brick by brick. All I did was remove one, and the whole thing started to crumble. He called me a week later. Did you contact my office? His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge underneath. Why would I? I asked. Don't play games, Sarah. You're not smart enough for this. I almost laughed. You'd be surprised. There was silence on the other end, then the click of the line disconnecting. For the first time, he sounded unsteady. My therapist, Dr. Myers, kept telling me to stay grounded. You're not fighting to destroy him, she said during one of our sessions. You're fighting to rebuild yourself. Remember that. And she was right. Every part of me wanted to lash out, to expose him to the world, to make him feel the same pain he'd caused me. But that wasn't healing. That was just noise. So I focused on the truth. The facts. When his job suspended him pending investigation, he filed a motion to delay the custody hearing again. His lawyer claimed undue emotional distress. I sat there in court watching him look smaller than I'd ever seen him. The calm, polished man who once called me unstable couldn't even look the judge in the eye. That's when I realized he wasn't powerful. He was just protected. And that protection was finally peeling away. But power shifts come with consequences. That night, someone banged on my apartment door. 3 times. Hard. I froze. When I looked through the peephole, I saw no one. Just an envelope taped to the door. My name written in his handwriting. Inside was a single photo, Ryan holding the kids in the park. On the back, in thick black ink, they're mine. I sat on the floor for an hour, the photo in my lap, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. He was reminding me that no matter how strong I thought I'd become, he still had what mattered most. But that was his mistake. Because the next day, I stopped playing defense. I went to the police. I reported the harassment. I gave them the letter. They told me it wasn't a direct threat, but it was enough to document. That was all I needed, an official record. Another crack in his mask. Then I made another move. I met with a child psychologist, someone neutral, court-approved. I wanted to understand what the kids might be experiencing with him. I didn't accuse, didn't hint, just asked questions. After a few sessions, the psychologist reached out to the court, recommending a custody reassessment due to concerning behavioral patterns. She didn't say whose patterns, but I knew. Ryan was unraveling, and I was just getting started. That night, as I packed more documents into my growing binder, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look fragile anymore. My eyes were steady. My hands didn't shake. The woman staring back at me was different, colder, maybe, but real. I whispered to myself, "You wanted unstable? You got strategic." And I meant it. The reassessment hearing was set for the following month. That gave me exactly 4 weeks to prepare. 4 weeks to make sure every loose end was tied, every fact verifiable, every trace of emotion replaced by clarity. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for proof that I was a mother fit to raise her children. I stopped crying at night. I stopped replaying his words in my head. I even stopped checking his social media. He wanted me to look obsessed, erratic. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I built a timeline. A full, detailed record of everything that had happened. Every visit he denied, every message he sent, every lie he told. The truth had a pattern. And patterns are impossible to hide when you map them out. A week before the hearing, my lawyer called me in to review the psychologist's preliminary report. She sat across from me, eyes scanning the document, her face unreadable. "Sarah," she said finally, "you should see this." The report described the children's interactions with both parents. Grace had become unusually quiet around her father, while Eli often mentioned being scared when Daddy yells. There it was. Not from me, from a professional, neutral voice. It felt like breathing for the first time in months. Still, my lawyer warned me not to get ahead of myself. He'll deny everything. He'll say you coached them. I nodded. Let him. Because this time, I wasn't showing up broken. I was showing up prepared. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat with my coffee, staring at the pale light spilling through the window. I could almost hear my kids' laughter in that quiet. Grace humming to her dolls, Eli banging his spoon against the table. I whispered, "I'm coming for you." Then I grabbed my binder and left. Ryan was already there when I arrived, dark suit, polished shoes, same smug calm. Amanda wasn't with him, but I could see the exhaustion in his face. He looked thinner, restless. Maybe losing control didn't suit him. When the judge entered, the room went still. Ryan's lawyer began, trying to reframe everything as parental conflict exaggerated by emotional distress. Then it was our turn. My lawyer walked the court through the evidence. The texts, the HR report, the psychologist's findings, and the police documentation of the envelope he'd left at my door. Each page landed like a hammer. And then, she asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood up. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it. I made mistakes, I said. I trusted someone who convinced me I was weak. I let him decide who I was. But I'm not unstable. I'm a mother who's been fighting to be heard. And everything I've brought here today, that's my truth. The courtroom was silent. Ryan wouldn't look at me. The judge took a deep breath and said she would issue a temporary order. Shared custody pending final evaluation. It wasn't full custody, but it meant I'd see my kids again. It meant I'd won something real. When I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, but in a cleaner way. Like the kind of emptiness that comes before rebuilding. My lawyer hugged me. You did it, Sarah. This is the start. But I knew Ryan wouldn't stop. He'd find new ways to twist the narrative. He always did. That's why I needed to stay 2 steps ahead. That night, I called his mother. She sounded surprised. Sarah? Yes, I said calmly. I just wanted to let you know the court ordered shared custody. I'll be seeing the kids this weekend. A pause. Then, well, I hope you're feeling better. Ryan told us. I know what he told you, I interrupted. But from now on, if you want to know how I'm doing, ask me directly. There was a long silence before she murmured, all right. It wasn't forgiveness. It was reclaiming my voice. When I finally saw my kids again that weekend, Grace ran straight into my arms. Eli followed, clinging to my leg, his tiny hands shaking. I dropped to my knees, holding them so tightly I could barely breathe. Grace whispered, Daddy said you were sick. I kissed her forehead. I was baby. But I'm getting better now. And for the first time, I meant it. That night, after they fell asleep in my bed, I watched them, their small, peaceful faces in the glow of the nightlight. Ryan had stolen months from me. But he hadn't won. Because the woman he thought he broke? She'd turned into someone capable of destroying his lies one truth at a time. And deep down, I think he knew it. For a few weeks, things almost felt normal again. Mornings with cereal spills and cartoons. Afternoons at the park. Nights reading bedtime stories until Grace drifted off and Eli curled up against me, murmuring, Don't go, Mommy. But underneath the laughter and the calm, there was tension, thin, sharp, invisible. Like a wire pulled tight between me and Ryan, waiting to snap. Shared custody meant constant communication. Drop-offs. Pickups. Messages about the schedule. He used every one as a way to test me. If I replied too quickly, he'd say I was desperate. If I waited, he'd call me irresponsible. If I showed emotion, he'd smirk. So I became neutral. Short, polite, unreadable. Every text from me started sounding like a press release. Hi, Ryan. I'll be there at 5 p.m. Grace mentioned she needs her jacket. Thank you. No warmth. No sarcasm. Just facts. It drove him insane. A month into shared custody, the school called me. Mrs. Walker? Grace came to class today saying her daddy yelled at her and threw her tablet. I froze. Is she okay? She's fine now, but we're required to report any concerning behavior. The words required to report hit me like a punch. It meant documentation, another record, another piece of the puzzle. I didn't rush to confront him. I didn't even tell him I knew. I let him believe I was still playing catch-up while I quietly built a fortress of evidence. That weekend, during pickup, I noticed bruises on Eli's arm. Tiny, round marks. Not deep, but enough. Where'd you get those, buddy? I asked softly. He looked down. I spilled juice. Daddy got mad. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to drive straight to his house and tear down every wall. But I knew that's what Ryan was waiting for. An emotional explosion. Proof that I was unfit. So instead, I took pictures when he wasn't looking. Date stamped. Time stamped. Then I emailed them to my lawyer with one line. For record keeping. Please file under custody case notes. My lawyer called within hours. Sarah, we can request a welfare check and ask for supervised visitation pending review. But you need to be ready. He'll retaliate. I exhaled slowly. I'm already ready. And I was. When the court granted the request, Ryan's composure finally cracked. He showed up at the drop-off shaking with rage. You did this, he hissed through clenched teeth. You're turning them against me. I didn't answer. I just opened the car door and buckled Grace in. You're not stable, Sarah. You never will be. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, Then why do I keep winning? For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. The weeks that followed were strange. Peaceful on the outside, hollow on the inside. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt tired. Winning against someone like Ryan wasn't satisfying. It was exhausting, because every time I proved him wrong, he found a new way to twist the narrative. He started emailing mutual friends, sending long, rambling messages about how he was worried about my mental state. He posted old photos of us on social media with captions like, "Praying for Sarah. She's lost right now." I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Silence became my weapon. But silence has a cost. There were nights when I'd sit on the floor after putting the kids to bed, scrolling through old photos of us as a family, Eli's first birthday, Grace's first Christmas, and wonder if I'd ever stop missing the life I thought I had. Because here's the truth no one tells you about reclaiming power. It doesn't erase the grief. You can expose the liar, win in court, rebuild your world, and still lie awake at 2 a.m. remembering the sound of his laugh before everything went dark. One night, Grace woke up crying. She said she dreamed Daddy was shouting. I held her until she fell asleep again, and I realized something important. My war wasn't just with Ryan anymore. It was with the version of myself that kept waiting for peace to come from him. It never would. Peace wasn't a gift I'd get from a judge or a lawyer or an apology. It was something I had to create in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, when I chose not to respond, when I chose to heal instead of hate. So I started therapy again. Not because I was unstable, but because I wanted to stop letting his voice live rent-free in my head. By the time the final custody decision came, Ryan had burned through his charm. The HR case had cost him his job. The psychologist's report was clear. The bruises had been documented. The judge granted me full custody. Ryan got supervised visits twice a month. When the gavel hit the desk, I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and whispered, "It's over." But it wasn't, not really. Because power, once taken back, doesn't just sit quietly. It grows roots. And I knew mine were finally starting to take hold. That night, I stood outside under the cold air, looking at the stars. I wasn't the same woman who once begged him to come home. I was something he'd never be able to understand, free. The day after the ruling, I woke up before dawn again. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that used to terrify me. Now it just felt new. The sunlight crept across the floor, cutting through the dust in thin golden lines. I made coffee and watched the steam rise. No text from Ryan. No calls. No threats disguised as concern. For the first time in almost 3 years, my phone was just a phone, not a weapon he could use against me. The kids were still asleep. Grace had started drawing again. Bright colors, people holding hands, sometimes little hearts floating above them. I'd found one taped to my bedroom door last night. Me and Mommy forever. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Not from sadness this time, from relief. Because I'd done it. I'd brought them back home. But peace, I was learning, didn't just arrive when the battle ended. It had to be built piece by fragile piece. Ryan still had visitation rights, supervised at the Family Resource Center. I dropped the kids off for their first session that Saturday. Grace clung to my hand. Eli's eyes darted around the parking lot like he was expecting him to appear out of nowhere. When he finally walked in, he looked smaller. His once perfect posture was slumped, hair disheveled, tie loose. The man who used to control every room he walked into now looked like someone who didn't belong anywhere. He didn't even look at me. Just signed in, forced a smile for the kids, and followed the counselor inside. Watching them walk away was like reopening an old wound. But this time I wasn't bleeding, I was healing. The counselor later told me. The children were quiet at first, but they warmed up halfway through. Ryan tried to push boundaries, though, kept asking about your new address, your friends. We redirected him. Of course he did. He couldn't help himself. Control wasn't something he did. It was who he was. But the more he reached, the less he grasped. And that, I realized, was its own kind of justice. Still, part of me wrestled with guilt. I'd catch myself wondering if I'd gone too far. If maybe he really did love them, in his own broken way. But then I'd remember that morning, the door slam, the way he said, "You're not well enough to care for them." Love doesn't weaponize weakness. Love doesn't steal your children to prove a point. And I needed to keep remembering that. A few weeks later, I was called into another review meeting. Ryan had missed 2 consecutive supervised visits. The center couldn't reach him. His phone was disconnected. It turned out he'd moved, sold the house, left his job, disappeared to another city. His lawyer filed a notice of withdrawal. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. I should have been relieved. But instead, I felt this strange emptiness, like standing on a battlefield after the war, surrounded by silence and smoke. He was gone. The man who'd haunted every corner of my life gone. And now, I had to figure out who I was without the fight. At first, it was disorienting. I'd lived so long reacting to him that I forgot what it meant to live for myself. So I started small. I applied for a part-time job at the library. I joined a support group for women who'd lost custody battles and fought their way back. I began to speak again, not like a victim recounting a tragedy, but like a survivor teaching others how to rebuild. One night, after a meeting, a woman came up to me in tears. "He took my kids too," she said. "I thought I was crazy until I heard your story." I took her hands and said, "You're not crazy. You're just living through someone else's lie. But lies end. Eventually, they all do." She nodded. And I realized, helping others heal was helping me heal too. A few months later, the court finalized everything. My custody was permanent. Ryan's visitation rights were revoked indefinitely after he failed to comply with mandatory counseling. It was over. Officially. I remember walking out of that courthouse, feeling the wind on my face. No tears, no shaking. Just quiet strength. For so long, I thought justice would feel like fire, like revenge, like triumph. But it didn't. It felt like calm water. Still. Deep. Peaceful. That night, after tucking the kids in, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The first page was still there from months ago, the one where I'd written. He took my kids and told the court I was mentally unstable. Under it, I wrote, he was wrong. And then I closed the book. Sometimes I still think about the woman I used to be. The one who apologized too much, who doubted every thought, who mistook control for love. I don't hate her. She did what she had to do to survive. But I'm not her anymore. I've learned that power isn't about fighting louder. It's about standing still when someone tries to shake you. It's about choosing silence not out of fear, but out of peace. And it's about knowing that the truest revenge is living a life they can no longer touch. Freedom is a strange thing. You wait for it, beg for it, fight tooth and nail for it. And when it finally arrives, you don't know what to do with it. That's what the first few months felt like. No more court dates, no lawyers, no emails from his side, just space. I'd forgotten what silence sounded like. I started to rebuild my life in pieces. Grace was in kindergarten now, Eli in preschool. Our mornings were chaos, cereal spills, missing shoes, mismatched socks. But it was our chaos, not one controlled by fear. I took a job at the local library, quiet, predictable, surrounded by stories that didn't judge me. The routine grounded me. There was something healing about scanning barcodes and stacking books, as if putting order into small things could somehow restore order inside me. I wasn't ready to date. People asked sometimes, friends gently hinting, maybe someday? But I wasn't looking for someday. I was still learning to trust myself. That takes longer than learning to trust someone else. One night, after closing up the library, I found an old woman sitting by the shelves near the back. She looked lost. When I asked if she needed help, she smiled and said, "Just revisiting ghosts, dear." She was holding a book on grief. I asked if she'd lost someone. She nodded. "A husband. Years ago. But it's not the losing that haunted me. It's realizing I lost myself long before he left." That line hit something deep in me. After she left, I sat in the empty library, staring at the shelves, thinking about all the parts of me I'd lost. The laughter, the confidence, the way I used to sing while cooking. And I made a quiet promise. I'm going to find every one of them again. So I did small things. I painted one wall in the living room yellow, the same color he once called too childish. I bought a cheap guitar and started teaching myself basic chords. I even changed my last name back to my maiden one, not out of bitterness, but because it finally felt like me again. Every little act felt like reclaiming oxygen. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, I'd wake up in cold sweat after dreaming I lost the kids again. Other times, I'd see a man with Ryan's build at the grocery store and freeze. That's trauma. It hides in the mundane. Dr. Myers told me, "Your body remembers before your mind does." That's normal. So I learned to breathe through it. To remind myself, "You're safe now." And slowly, those echoes started to fade. The more I healed, the more I wanted to help others do the same. So I volunteered at a local women's shelter. I started with paperwork, organizing donations. But one evening, a new woman arrived, scared, quiet, clutching her toddler. She wouldn't speak to anyone. Until she saw me. She said, "They told me you got your kids back." I nodded. Then she whispered, "How?" I took her hand, and for the first time since all this began, I told my story. Not as a victim, not as revenge, but as survival. And when she cried, I didn't try to stop her. I just said, "You'll get through it. One day, you'll breathe again without shaking." That night, I realized something. Maybe my pain wasn't wasted. Maybe it was meant to be recycled, turned into something that could guide others out of their own darkness. Life didn't suddenly turn perfect. Bills still piled up. Co-parenting still required signatures. Some mornings I was too tired to even brush my hair. But there was light now, soft, steady, persistent. Grace started drawing us as superheroes. Eli began sleeping through the night. And me? I started living without waiting for the next battle. Because the war was over. And this rebuilding was the real victory. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. I'd just finished a shift at the library when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those anymore. But something in my gut told me to pick up. "Sarah?" The voice was hesitant, rougher than I remembered, but still unmistakable. "Ryan." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air in the car felt heavier, like the world had shrunk to the sound of his voice. "What do you want?" I finally said. He paused, cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I almost laughed. It wasn't anger, it was disbelief. After years of silence, he thought a single word could rewrite history. "Sorry," I repeated, my voice shaking. "You destroyed me, Ryan. You made me fight for my own children. You called me unstable in front of a judge." "I know." He sounded small, defeated. "I lost everything. My job, my house, even Amanda. I've been in therapy. I just needed to tell you that I understand now what I did." Silence. I could hear cars passing outside, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Understanding doesn't erase it," I said quietly. "I know," he whispered. "But I had to try." And then he hung up. I sat there in the parking lot, staring at the screen, waiting for the familiar wave of panic to hit me. But it didn't. Instead, there was this strange calm. He was still trying to control the narrative, but for once, I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't need to yell, or forgive, or even feel sorry for him. He wasn't my problem anymore. I rolled down the window and let the cold air in. That was the moment I realized I'd won something even bigger than custody. I'd won my peace. But peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. Over the next few weeks, I kept replaying that call in my head. Not because I missed him, I didn't. But because I wanted to understand why it didn't hurt anymore. Dr. Myers called it closure fatigue. When someone's caused you enough pain, your heart just runs out of space for it. It stops reacting. That made sense. My heart had finally gone quiet. Around that time, the shelter where I volunteered asked if I'd share my story publicly. They were hosting an awareness event for women fighting custody manipulation, something I knew all too well. My first instinct was no. Talking about Ryan, about courtrooms and bruises and therapy in front of strangers? I wasn't sure I could handle that. But then I thought of that woman who had asked, "How did you do it?" And I said yes. The night of the event, I stood backstage trembling, holding my note cards. My palms were sweating, my throat dry. Then I looked out at the crowd, maybe 50 women, some holding hands, others sitting alone. I took a deep breath and said, "My name is Sarah Walker, and 2 years ago, my husband told a judge I was too unstable to raise my children." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. I told them everything, the lies, the court, the fear, the photos, the night I decided to fight back. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't make it sound noble. I just told the truth. When I finished, no one clapped right away. Then slowly they did. Not loud or dramatic, just soft, real. Afterward, a woman my age came up to me, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You don't know me," she said, "but I'm where you were. And now I know I'm not crazy." That was it. That was the moment I realized what healing really meant. It wasn't about getting justice anymore. It was about giving someone else the courage to believe they could too. A few days later, Ryan texted again. Just one line. "Thank you for not hating me." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I don't hate you, Ryan. I just don't know you anymore." And that was true. The man who once controlled every breath I took now felt like a stranger. When I told Dr. Myers about the call, she smiled and said, "That's forgiveness, Sarah. The kind that doesn't excuse, it just releases." I thought about that a lot. Forgiveness wasn't about him deserving it. It was about me deserving freedom. That weekend, I took Grace and Eli to the beach. The kids ran toward the water, laughing, chasing waves that kept pulling back just before they touched their feet. Grace shouted, "Come on, Mommy." I kicked off my shoes and ran with them, letting the cold water splash against my legs. For a moment, I forgot everything, the pain, the past, even my own name. It was just us. The ocean. The sound of their laughter. And the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was what surviving was supposed to feel like. By the next spring, my life had quietly transformed. I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the library, Grace was reading her first chapter books, and Eli had learned to ride his bike without training wheels. The house finally felt like a home, not a recovery ward. On weekends, I volunteered at the shelter. The women started calling me Ms. Sarah, half respect, half affection. I began mentoring a few of them directly, helping with custody paperwork, connecting them to therapists. It felt strange, being the strong one. For years, I'd been the woman everyone pitied. Now, I was the one reminding others that survival was possible. But life has a way of testing you right when you think you've moved past the pain. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw him again. "Ryan." I was walking the kids out of the grocery store, a bag of apples in one hand and Eli's fingers wrapped around the other. Grace was humming beside me when I heard someone say my name. "Sarah." I turned, and there he was, standing by a beat-up car, wearing a wrinkled jacket and sunglasses. He looked older. Not just tired, but hollow. "Ryan," I said evenly. He took off the glasses. "You look good. The kids too." Grace froze. Eli moved behind me, clutching my arm. He lifted his hand slightly, like he wanted to come closer, but stopped when he saw the way the kids tensed. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quietly. "I just wanted to see them, and you." I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "There's a process for that. You know that." He nodded. "I know. I wanted to apologize in person. I thought maybe." "Ryan," I cut in. "Don't finish that sentence." He blinked. "You don't get to rewrite what happened. You don't get to show up like it's some movie moment where everything makes sense. You hurt us. You lied. And we rebuilt without you." His jaw tightened, but there was no anger, only shame. "I know," he said again, softer this time. "I lost myself. I didn't even realize what I'd become until there was nothing left. I wanted to believe him. Maybe part of me even did. But I'd learned something in therapy. Closure doesn't always mean conversation. Sometimes it's just walking away. So I said, I hope you get the help you need, Ryan. But this, I gestured toward the kids, this life isn't yours anymore. He looked at Grace, then Eli. His eyes watered. Tell them I'm sorry. I will. When they're ready. He nodded, turned, and walked away. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch watching the streetlights flicker through the trees. I thought about that moment, the look on his face when I told him it was over. I didn't feel triumph or pity, just peace. Because closure isn't winning. It's realizing you don't need to fight anymore. Weeks passed. Ryan didn't try to contact us again. I heard through someone at the shelter that he'd checked into a recovery center out of state. And strangely, that news didn't stir up anger or relief. Just acceptance. For the first time, I could look back without flinching. That summer, I was invited to speak at a national conference on family law reform, a panel about psychological manipulation in custody cases. Me, the woman who once sat shaking in a courtroom, labeled unstable. I stood behind the podium, lights hot on my face, and began. 3 years ago, I was told I was too mentally unstable to raise my children. Today, I'm here to tell you what happens when we stop believing the lies others write about us and start writing our own truth. The audience went silent. Then someone stood and clapped. Then another, until the whole room did. And I knew in that moment that my story had stopped being just mine. After the event, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. She said, "My ex is doing the same thing to me right now. He's saying I'm unstable. I feel like I'm disappearing." I took her hand and said the same words I once whispered to myself. "You're not unstable. You're surviving." And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just telling her a line. I was speaking a truth I had earned. That night, I drove home, rolled down the windows, and let the wind hit my face. The moon was out, bright, full, unapologetic. For years, I thought revenge was power. But standing there under that sky, I understood something deeper. Power is the quiet ability to rebuild your life in the ruins someone else left behind, and make it beautiful again. When I tucked Grace and Eli into bed that night, Grace whispered, "Mommy, will Daddy ever come back?" I thought for a long moment. Then I said, "Maybe. But if he does, it won't change who we are now." She nodded sleepily, curling up beside her brother. And as I turned off the light, I finally understood what peace felt like. Not forgetting the pain, but outgrowing it. It's been 4 years now. Sometimes I still wake up before dawn, make coffee, and sit in the same kitchen where everything once fell apart. The difference is, it's mine now. The walls are warm with kids' drawings, the fridge covered in crayon hearts and spelling tests. There's laughter here again, echoing through spaces that used to hold only silence. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly under your breath while you pour cereal. I've built something I never thought I'd have again, stability. Not the fragile, performative kind Ryan once offered, but the solid, self-earned kind that no one can take away. The kids are thriving. Grace wants to be an artist, Eli a firefighter. They still ask about their dad sometimes, not with fear anymore, just curiosity. I tell them the truth gently. Your dad got lost for a while, but he's trying to find his way back. Because I've learned that telling the truth doesn't have to mean reopening old wounds. It can just mean closing them with honesty. A few months ago, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Ryan. It was short. Only 2 paragraphs. Sarah, I've been clean for a year. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you for giving me the space to become better. I finally understand what I took from you, and what I lost in the process. If the kids ever want to know me again, I'll be waiting. But I won't force it. I read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. That was the closure I didn't know I still needed. I didn't write back. Forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. Now, when I speak to women at the shelter or at conferences, I tell them something I wish someone had told me. You don't have to become the person you were before the pain. You're allowed to be someone new, someone stronger, wiser, softer, all at once. I tell them healing isn't linear. It's 1,000 tiny moments where you choose peace instead of rage. It's deleting a text instead of sending it. It's sitting alone and realizing you're not lonely anymore. And I see it click in their eyes, that fragile spark of hope. The same one that carried me when I thought I was broken beyond repair. One night, I recorded a video for the shelter's YouTube channel. I sat in front of the camera, no makeup, hair tied up, just me real, unfiltered. I said, "He took my kids once. Told the court I was mentally unstable. And for a while I believed him. But here's what I know now. No one can define your worth unless you hand them the pen." I stopped letting him write my story. And I started writing my own. The comments flooded in within hours. Women from all over the world saying they'd been through the same, thanking me for giving them hope. I read every one of them, tears rolling down my cheeks. Not from sadness, from pride. Because the girl who once sat shaking in a courtroom had become a voice for others still trapped in theirs. Sometimes late at night, I still think about the first version of me, barefoot on those cold tiles, staring at the empty driveway, watching the man I loved drive away with my children. I want to reach back through time and hold her hand. Tell her, you won't believe this now, but one day, you'll thank the storm for showing you how strong you are. So here I am, still healing, still learning, still living. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, just as a woman who found her voice again. Because I lost him, but I found myself.